Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to webinar 2 of the series Exploring MYP Mathematics. This webinar is on the transition from MYP to DP. And my intention with this webinar today is to share our department's experience with transitioning from MYP to DP, to share our approach to planning our whole school curriculum, to share some observations we've made along the way. So again, as I said yesterday, it's more of a narrative and sharing rather than you need to do this, you need to do this. So it's more or less about what's worked for us and what we've become aware of when we've been exploring transition. So my agenda for today, I'll start off with a little bit of information. Then I will do some introductions. And then I'll give an overview of the observations that we've made, and I'll discuss some possible reasons for a perceived disconnect between the programmes. Then I'll look at in detail at the key areas that we found we needed to focus on when trying to smooth our transition process. And I'll look at the written curriculum, the taught curriculum, and the assessed curriculum. So I also hope to have some breaks as we're going through for questions and for comments. But I will have questions and comments at the end, and I'll be showing you a Padlet where you can pop in any questions that you have. If you don't have a chance to ask them today, or if you go away and you have a think about something and you come up with another question, then I'll show you where you can post that question as well. So a little bit of information before we start. So please remember to mute. And as Catherine said, please ask your questions in the Q&A. The resources I'll refer to today throughout this presentation, I've shared on a Padlet. So you can access the Padlet by the link that I've got on the bottom of the screen here, or by the QR code. And it might be useful to take a moment just to open it now, because some of my presentation slides, the text might be a little bit small. So if you have your own copy, you might be able to zoom in and see it a little bit clearer. As I said, the Q&A is there for questions, but if you'd like to ask on the Padlet, please do. So hopefully I can display the Padlet. It's here. Okay, so you can see on the Padlet the links from the webinar. I've put them all here. So this one here, the extract from the progression map, I recommend you download that, because when I project it, it's quite a big document and it's difficult to see. Grade descriptors are there. I'll come to these 10 small changes a little bit later and I'll explain what those are. So everything I'm referring to is here. Everything I'm going to talk about today, I've written a series of blog posts as well. So if you want to explore it in a little bit more detail, what I talk about today, then I put a link to the blog posts there. Feedback link, I'll come back to that at the end. If you have any questions that you want to pop on the Padlet, you can pop them here. And as I said, this webinar today it's observations about what we found when we're trying to smooth our transition. So if you've got some ideas and you've got your own observations, then I would love for you to share them. So if you've got any hints and tips as well, then this section here is a great place where you can share your ideas as well. Okay, so that's the Padlet. So introductions, little bit about me. I am Paula Rowlands and I have been head of the maths department at ISB since 2014. Before that, I was head of department in an IB school in the UK, and I have taught DP, I have taught A-levels, GCSEs, IGCSEs, and I've focused on the MYP and the DP since 2014. That just gives you a little bit of an introduction to my background. Let's begin with my transition story. So the IB programme consists of 3 sections, the PYP, the MYP and the DP. And in 2017, we realised as a school that we needed a comprehensive document detailing our maths curriculum across all 3 of those phases. But today I'll just be sharing my observations and reflections on the MYP to DP transition process. But if you have any questions about the PYP into MYP, or would like to discuss our maths continuum in more detail, then please do get in touch. We're more than happy to chat about the process. So little did I realise when I was doing all that for my own school, that it would prove to be really quite great grounding for the task that I was asked to take on as part of my role for the Pearson team. So I was asked to help with developing materials that would support teachers when planning the transition from MYP to DP. So I felt that mapping the content from the new MYP series to the DP curriculum, it seemed to be a great way of adapting and sharing what we'd already put in place as a way of supporting other MYP and DP teachers. So at the moment, I have mapped the content from the Pearson MYP series to the IP content structure, but at some point, perhaps over the summer when I have a few hours, I'm hoping to map it to the Pearson DP textbooks too. I'll share an extract of that with you today, and I'll give a brief demonstration of the structure. And as I mentioned previously, it might be an idea if you download an example of it from the Padlet, because it might be a little bit difficult to see on the screen. But I hope you'll be able to see the intention of the document today. So I will also summarise some of the findings we've made as we've been focusing on smoothing our transition across the programmes, some current research that's guided us and the philosophy behind the Pearson MYP series. But Ibrahim will be hosting another webinar to cover that in more detail. And then finally, I'll share some hints and tips that we found to be really quite useful when smoothing the transition from MYP to DP within mathematics. Okay, so when we started working on our curriculum, we realised very, very quickly that when planning the maths continuum, it's really important to fully appreciate that it's not just about planning the content progression. There also has to be a seamless transition in the way the concepts are taught and the way the understanding is assessed. Now, the IB describes it clearly in the MYP guide. And if you were in the webinar yesterday, you'll recognise this slide. It's all connected. Unit planning, transition, it's all connected. So not only does the content have to be planned sequentially, but also the teaching methods, the assessments, the problem solving strategies, they all need to be sequenced appropriately. So when you read this, it's quite clear that there is an intention for a smooth transition from the IB. But what we found is that it really does take planning and it takes attention to detail to get it right. Now, this consideration of what's taught, how it's taught and how successful it's been is described by the IB as the written, the taught and the assessed curriculum. And as I was mentioning yesterday in the unit planning webinar, these are all completely interconnected and they have to be considered in parallel if you're going to have a nice, smooth transition. So I'll chat about each of these, the written, the taught and the assessed curriculum. And I'll highlight details we've observed in our school that can help smooth the transition in each area. So I thought I'd start with just some anecdotal observations that we've noticed over the last few years. So we've noticed that the following key characteristics of students appear to lend themselves to a better start to the DP programme on a much more productive journey through the courses. So these are the ones that I've summarised that we've observed. So I'd be really interested to hear if anyone has any other observations to add. So we've noticed those students that have a real curiosity and a confidence to explore new mathematical ideas do better. Those students that have a conceptual understanding of the content rather than just a set of procedural skills. a clear understanding of the command terms and the notation used in the IB, an appreciation of the mathematics as an interconnected subject. So students who are aware that there are connections between subjects and they're not just discrete topic areas. An awareness of the 12 concepts within the MYP and the DP, and a set of strategies that they can rely on when they're starting to do problem solving, rather than steps that they take when they see familiar questions. So ensuring students begin the DP with these key attributes is really heavily dependent on their MYP experience. And it's vital, what we found, it's vital for success in DP to have a committed attitude to conceptual understanding rather than procedural approach. And we've found that this has to be embraced and supported by everyone. So teachers, students, parents, everybody. And if one party's not quite on board, then that does affect the transition. It doesn't make it quite as smooth. Okay, so let's start and have a look at the written curriculum. It's important that the maths concepts are introduced in a particular order, and this order is vital when writing the written curriculum. As maths teachers, we're well aware of the scaffolding that's required for a deep understanding. So at the start of our work on our continuum, we spent a lot of time developing and reviewing research and published mathematics curricula. Because we don't have the restriction of having to meet the restriction or the requirements of a national programme, our efforts could focus on making sure our curriculum led seamlessly through from PYP to DP. But I won't go into the details of current research on that curriculum design. So in this section, I'll just focus on how the content was mapped. I should point out here, if anyone's interested in our published mathematics continuum, I've popped it on the Padlet. There's a link there, but please be aware that we've just reviewed it. So we've done some changes to the PYP section, and we're about to publish the new version shortly. And also the one that I popped on the Padlet, that's the version that we published for our community. It's not our working document. Our working document is very similar to the spreadsheet that I'm going to share with you in a moment. So we developed our continuum into mathematics branches, and I adapted that so it aligned with the MYP branches for the Pearson series. And I did that with a specific intention of leading into all 4 of the diploma courses. So as I just mentioned, it's in the form of a spreadsheet. It's a large document, and I hope that it projects okay. But I hope you can see the format, I hope you can see the structure, and I hope you get the intention of the document. So hopefully, if I click here, there we are. So you can see at the bottom, I've organised it into different tabs there, and those are the MYP branches. So you have number and abstract reasoning, thinking with models, spatial reasoning, and reasoning with data. So if you click on any of those, it'll take you to the maths content in those branches. And then you can see on the left-hand side here, I've divided it into sub-branches. So number and abstract reasoning, it's the yellow column there. We've got number, operations, ratio, okay. And then in the blue column, you've got the topics that we considered fit into that sub-branch. And I'll see if I can zoom in a little bit here. There we go. So you can see in that sub-branch of number, percentages, you can see here in column D, this is what book 1 contains. And so if you're interested in MYP1 and you're looking at fractions, then you can see 5.1 section of that book contains this content here. And what I've tried to do is do a content and concept progression. So as you go across from column D, which is MYP1, through to column E, which is MYP2, and so on. And then as you go across, it takes you into the content that leads into the diploma. So if it's blank, it means don't really do much more with that content, you know, that's embedded. But if it leads into something, so you can see here, book 4 and 5 standard and extended, well, those lead into logarithms in each of the DP programs. And I've tried to do it, so it's divided into the AAs and the AIs. Okay, so I hope that's clear on the screen. So if we look at thinking with models, you can see there, linear programming, that goes across the books. There we are, networks, you can see that only occurs in the AIHL. But if your school is planning to offer that, then this would be a good precursor to that content in the diploma. So I hope that's been clear, and it just shows how you can track the maths content and the maths concepts. And I hope that will be helpful for you. So I'll take a moment and just stop here if there are any questions.
We don't have any questions yet, Paula.
Oh,
but,
okay.
Please do submit your questions if you have one.
Okay, I'll wait a moment in case any appear, because this happened yesterday. There were no questions and then there were lots of questions. So I'll just wait for a few seconds.
So we've had a couple. Somebody's asking how to access the document, the link, the map. You have the link in the
okay. Yeah, there's a link in the Padlet to an extract of it. So you can have a look at what that particular section looks like. A link to the whole document, I don't know. Catherine, are we sharing that? I don't know.
So as part of the Pearson MYP Math series, we do have some teacher guides, and the teacher guides do contain the full document. So in the follow-up email, we will put a link to how you would purchase the teacher guides.
Okay.
And then there's a question, how do the book references align from MYP 1 to DP?
Oh, so I'm not sure if I've understood the question correctly, so please tell me if I've got this, if I've misinterpreted it. So if you look at the spreadsheet, perhaps if I go back to number and abstract reasoning. So if you look here, so sub-branch, we are looking at number. And if we look at roots, irrationals and exponents, so you can see here in book 1, you've got the basics of roots, irrationals and exponents. And then this section here in book 1 leads into this section here in book 2. And then that will lead into the section in the standard book here. And then in these columns here, it leads into the diploma. I don't know if I've understood the question. Did that answer the question? Or?
Christopher, if that didn't answer your question, please let us know. That's it for now, Paula, if you want to continue.
All righty, okay. Okie dokie. So, some suggestions, some things that we've noticed that really helped us with smoothing our written curriculum transition from MYP to DP. So developing that school-wide continuum really helped. It gave us our structure, it gave us a whole written guide. That really helped us. And so we were able to plan out the entire mathematical journey. And it helped us because we know if we've got content gaps and we can minimize them. But obviously we can't ensure that all students follow all our topics, and we've got quite a transient community here. But having a clear idea of the overall plan for the school's mathematics continuum will help. It does make it easier for everyone to see where the possible gaps are when moving schools, when leaving us, and when arriving here. Base the MYP units on the continuum plan. So incorporate the already planned content and concepts into the units, and keep the unit planning focused on what's been agreed to for the grade rather than what teachers would like to cover. This is best achieved with collaboration, and if everyone's on board at the start, it makes for a much tighter curriculum net. Keep track of any changes that you have to make to the curriculum during the year as it progresses. Make sure that any content gaps are caught up with in the plans for next year. And again, having that whole school continuum in place really helps to identify problem areas quickly. The best content transition support for us, without a doubt, has come from collaborating with our colleagues, both in the different sections within our own school and talking to other people in other MYP DP schools. When we were developing the curriculum and when we were implementing the curriculum. It's also important to collaborate within grade teams, so all students are receiving the same exposure to the content and the concepts. So next I'll look at the taught curriculum and how MYP to DP transition can be supported by considering what's the best approach in the classroom. And in particular, again, what's been helpful for us. So irrespective to the age or the programme of study, current research supports the following key strategies to support students' successful progress in mathematics. So the first one is teaching conceptual understanding in parallel with problem-solving skills. And the second one is allowing the students to explore concepts before introducing them. And conceptual understanding and developed problem-solving skills are absolutely vital for students to be able to apply their skills to unfamiliar situations, and exploring the concepts before the teacher introduces them. We found that that develops their curiosity, their problem-solving, their engagement, and their enjoyment. And it also moves the focus from one of mathematical performance to one of mathematical inquiry. And this is important across the MYP through to the DP. And we found that making sure this approach is consistent across both programmes is absolutely vital. So in this taught curriculum section, I'll look at concepts. I'll discuss a little bit of confusion that I sometimes see in teachers and students who are new to the MYP. And I'll demonstrate how the Pearson series supports the conceptual approach and provides ideas for these explore before you tell tasks that you can use in the classroom. But I won't go into too much detail on that because Ibrahim will be doing that in his webinar at the end of April. But I'll cover it briefly here because we found it to be so important to smooth the transition from MYP to DP. Okay, so let's have a look at what the IB refers to directly in terms of conceptual learning in the guides. So the DP guide refers to conceptual understanding to promote deep learning and the MYP guide refers to conceptual understanding as a way of being able to apply skills in unfamiliar contexts, such as problem solving, analysing, and evaluating. Conceptual understanding at MYP level is not only vital for success at MYP, but you can see it also underpins the conceptual understanding that's required for deep learning in the DP courses. Therefore, a conceptual understanding approach in the MYP should provide a better foundation for starting the DP. And anecdotally, we have noticed that students arriving from schools that have a more procedural approach tend to struggle a bit more with the assessment questions in the DP. And we've also seen that they struggle a little bit more with the IA component of the DP course. So to aid that area of transition, we found that it's important to have the same conceptual approach in both of the programmes. If I say that, what do I mean by conceptual approach? So I've noticed a little bit of confusion, and we were chatting about this a little bit in yesterday's webinar on unit planning, there's a little bit of confusion about when maths teachers talk about concepts. So there's the conceptual understanding, so the mathematical concepts, and then there's the key and related concepts, the big picture and the small details. So those key and related concepts, those are the transferable ideas. They're the framework for exploring the mathematical concepts. And we have big ideas in MYP mathematics that are our key concepts, and that's form, logic, and relationships. And those tend to be the framework for our MYP units. And then we have the related concepts. So I've listed them here. That's approximation, change, equivalence, generalization, models, pattern, quantity, representation, simplification, space, systems, and validity. Now, how these can be used to explore mathematical concepts is probably identified a little bit more clearly with an example. So our three big ideas for MYP mathematics are form, logic, and relationships. So as I said previously, these are the big ideas. They're the big ideas that help frame our MYP units. Now, the related concepts, these are in both the MYP and in the DP. So if I give an example of how they kind of interconnect, and I'll use the example that I used yesterday as well for continuity. So we've got functions, so the content topic of functions, and here the key concept of form can guide our exploration of functions by representing the relationship between two variables in different forms. For example, in algebra, in algebraic form through function notation, in graphical form through mapping diagrams, and then the concept of equivalence connects the mathematical concept of solving equations graphically and algebraically by understanding how two expressions can have the same value and what this means and what it can imply. So when viewed like this, it's a little easier to see the intrinsic connection between the idea of a concept as a big picture, framing a mathematically specific one. Okay, so sometimes the idea of concepts is not clear for students. So making it explicit can help with the transition from MYP to DP, as it helps to focus students and teachers on a conceptual approach rather than just a procedural one. As far as I'm aware, the DP has always had a conceptual approach to mathematics understanding, but the big picture concepts that they are new, they're new to the new DP courses. So in order to aid the transition from MYP to DP, how can a conceptual approach be facilitated in the classroom in both programs? So in this next section, I'll show you a section of an example from our unit planners for both DP and for MYP. And it'll demonstrate how we try to support the inclusion of the big idea concepts at the start of a unit. And then I'll show some examples from the Pearson series to demonstrate how they can be used as resources. So I'll share an example of an explore task, and I'll show how that open approach of notice and wonder can be incorporated into the lesson, and how that can be used and useful in the MYP and in the DP classroom, and how we use this approach in both programs. And I'll show how the examples in the books can support the inclusion of some problem-solving lessons and problem-solving techniques within the core of the lesson. But again, I won't go into too much detail because Ibrahim will cover those in a bit more detail in his webinar. Okay, so I'm going to do this slide here. I'm going to show this slide here. So again, it might be useful for you if you can't see that small text. I've put a copy of this on the Padlet, so it might help if you zoom in and you can see. So what you have here, that top box, this is a screenshot of one of our DP units, the one at the top. It's just the top bit. It's not the whole unit. It's just where we're setting out the unit, the details of the unit. And the one at the bottom is our MYP5, our standard unit plan. And again, just the information at the top that frames the unit. So for both programs, the big picture concepts are shared at the start of the unit. And the overarching concepts set the scene for the approach to the topic in both programs. And you can see the statement of inquiry links the concepts. And in both programs, there are inquiry lenses that inform the unit as one of inquiry. So you can see in our DP at the top there, inquiry questions, we have factual, conceptual, and debatable. So that's carried through from our MYP unit plan, where you can see our inquiry questions there. And you can see like a little bit of a maturity from our inquiry questions in our MYP unit. There's a little bit of a link to the inquiry questions in our diploma unit. Okay, so for example, in our MYP unit there, our inquiry question number 2, are there ever restrictions on the numbers we can include in the set? And then if you look at the DP, one of the conceptual questions, how does the domain and range change for different functions? So we try to have a little bit of continuity there. And you can see our statement of inquiry, very similar. They are connected. So by sharing this approach with teachers and students, there's some support there for the transition. So this highlights how we can make teachers and students aware of concepts in MYP and DP. And as mentioned previously, a deeper understanding of mathematical concepts can be supported through open inquiry tasks before formally introducing them. So in the next few slides, I'll show an example of an explore task that demonstrates how the approach can be included in the MYP lesson. And then I'll show a DP question that highlights why it's important that this is considered part of a smooth transition. So first of all, the MYP type questions. So the explore task, you'll notice it doesn't ask students just to follow steps. It's more open-ended, and students are free to explore and make their own observations. They're encouraged to observe and reason, promoting their curiosity and developing an inquiry approach rather than a performance approach. The mathematical concepts are then presented with explanations and worked solutions to reinforce understanding. At the start of this section, I referred to the current research that supports having a parallel inquiry and problem-solving approach within the core lessons. And although I won't go into details about supporting this development within students here, again, I keep mentioning it, but Ibrahim will be going into detail in his webinar at the end of April. But this will help students to embed strategies to approach the questions that will be in the DP assessment. Again, it's helping to smooth the transition from MYP to DP. So I'll show you a DP question now. I've taken this out of the AASL Time Zone 2, Paper 1, May 2021. So when you first look at this, you can see this example is a problem. It's not a question, it's a problem. And the difference is the route to the answer here is not immediately obvious. Now, a procedural approach won't be quite so helpful here. The student needs to notice and wonder, and they need to draw on their conceptual understanding and use their approaches to problem solving. So if these skills are developed in the MYP and continued into DP, then it can only help smooth the transition. And in a similar way, there are investigation tasks. And again, that's to develop students' deeper understanding and their inquiry approach to tasks. And I think these are really quite a good preparation for the IA. And they're also a good preparation for the paper 3 type questions in HL. So in summary, these are some of the ideas that we found just to help smooth the transition from MYP to DP within our talk curriculum. So try and develop an inquiry approach to learning in the MYP maths classroom that focuses on inquiry tasks and build up those inquiry skills. Develop student problem-solving skills as a planned and core part of the lesson. Focus on the skills needed for problem-solving within embedded and familiar mathematical concepts. And again, we were chatting about this in the unit planning webinar yesterday. Allow the student opportunities to explore tasks before explaining and introducing the concepts. Highlight links between different areas of maths and incorporate topics from previous units into class tasks and into assessment tasks. So keep reinforcing that notion of a connection within mathematics. And although each of these suggestions is concerned with the talk curriculum, they are directly related to smoothing the transition within assessment. And that leads me on to the third component when we're considering transition, and that's the assessed curriculum. So now I will have a look at the assessed curriculum. So I've shown how the written curriculum and the talk curriculum for MYP and DP can be aligned. However, the assessment curriculum is a little bit different. There are different expectations for the MYP course and for the DP course. The two programs are similar in that they are weekly criterion referenced. And if you're not too sure about how the IB does their weekly criterion referencing, then I've put a link on the Padlet. The IB published a fantastic document explaining how they decide their grade boundaries. It's really enlightening reading, so I suggest you have a look at that. The MYP assessment consists of 4 criteria, and each strand of each criteria must be assessed at least twice per year. And then the total score of each assessment relates to an overall grade boundary descriptor. The DP is criteria referenced internal assessment, and the examination score at the end of the 2 years is related to a grade boundary descriptor. However, and this is where we start to see there's a little bit of a confusion arises sometimes just in that first transition from MYP to DP. The levels that are published and the grade descriptors that go with those levels, they reflect slightly different expectations for the same score. So we found that this can lead to a little bit of confusion, and it does sometimes identify areas of a potential disconnect between the two programs. And we found that we need to address this at the start of the diploma course. So it's worth taking a moment to compare the expectations of the two programs, and then you might see where this little bit of a misunderstanding can sometimes occur. And again, it's one of my very tiny font slides. So again, I've put a link to this on the webinar. So hopefully you can zoom in on it and see it a little bit more clearly. So what I have here on the left are the grade descriptors for the MYP. So at the end of the MYP, these are the descriptors that go with the grade level. And then on the right, I have the grade descriptors for the DP. Okay, so there are some similarities in that the overall grade can be between 1 and 7. But when you read through it, when you compare the two, then you start to see a few differences that we think may have caused a bit of confusion. So for MYP students that don't take the e-assessment route, the criterion-based descriptors are used by the teachers when assessing their work. But the IB examinations are weekly criterion-based and still have the A marks and the M marks, so it's marked slightly differently. So we find that this needs to be explained at the start of the DP course. And in my experience, students adapt very quickly to this, and it doesn't seem to cause any confusion. And what I've become aware of is the expectations that a student will have for a particular grade level is where the confusion arises. So reading the MYP and DP descriptors, it shows that the expectations are different for a given number. So if we look at the MYP level 7, it has a requirement of evidence of nuanced understanding of concepts and contexts. In contrast, the DP grade descriptors are focused on knowledge and understanding of the syllabus, problem solving, mathematical connections, and use of technology. So if the levels are the same between the programs, i.e. between a 1 and a 7, then there's a potential misunderstanding that a given level in MYP automatically equates to the same level in DP. So we found that it's essential from the start of the MYP course that students are aware of the descriptors and how this relates to their current skill sets. In their mind, they will have a description that corresponds to a level number, and when they start the DP, won't necessarily be the same descriptor. So students might not always understand that they need to demonstrate different skills at DP for a given level. So we find sharing the grade level descriptors for the DP assessments at the start of the course and highlighting the differences will make students more aware of the areas they need to develop during the course and will help the transition. We have also found that in the MYP, if the students are not preparing for the E-assessment, then they don't have quite as much experience of external examinations. And this is quite an important aspect of the DP exams. And at DP, there is a focus on examining GDC skills, and that's not necessarily a requirement at MYP. So these are some suggestions that have helped us to smooth the transition from MYP to DP. So I'm summarising it all, what I've been chatting about. So we found that these can help when you are trying to smooth your transition from MYP to DP in the assessed curriculum. So in the DP, they have that 5 minutes reading time. And we find that they don't quite know what to do with it. So if you introduce that for MYP assessments, it helps students to develop strategies and ways of using that time effectively before they get into the DP examination hall. We find giving students timed MYP assessments, that helps, so they develop their strategies for managing time under exam conditions. Deconstruct the grade descriptors at the start of DP, so there's a clear understanding of what the descriptors mean and what skills are necessary for each level. Include specific GDC skill assessment in the MYP assessments. Have a focus on the MYP, have a focus on the graphical display calculator in the MYP. Develop fluency in parallel with inquiry. It is important to maintain the expectation of practice in maths. Inquiry is essential for understanding. Practice is absolutely necessary for fluency. And assess criterion C with criterion B, or assess criterion C with criterion D in the summative assessments, because this is how it's assessed in the E-assessment, and it's also the DP assessments. So I've shared the 10 small changes summary sheet from the blog posts that go with this transition series. They might be helpful for you. They're just some things that we've noticed and we found to be helpful. So they are on the blog post, and it's these 10 small changes here. So I think they are available on Pearson's website, but I've also shared them here for you. Just little things, small changes that we found have helped us along the way. So in this webinar, I've given some suggestions of things we found work when we're considering the transition from MYP to DP. I hope some of them may be useful for you and for your departments. I would absolutely love to hear of any suggestions that anybody else might have. So please feel free to share these on the Padlet. If you'd like to read a little bit further around the topics of teaching through inquiry and conceptual mathematics, on this slide here, I've given just a couple of references. They're really good sources. And as I mentioned yesterday, Colin Foster's work on problem solving in the maths classroom is absolutely great. He's got some smashing ideas and some really good resources that he shares. And of course, Dolan William, his work on assessment practices, we must all read that. If you'd like to read a little bit more about my reflections on MYP to DP transition, then please see the blog posts. Again, I've shared those on the Padlet. So I will stop now and I will take any questions that might be available.
And we have had a couple come in, Paula. This one came in about 20 minutes ago. So how do you deal with principals or MYP coordinators suggesting that your units are too content heavy or that the content is flexible, so it's okay to spend more time on reteaching assumed knowledge and missing out on some content in a unit?
I'm sorry, can you say that one again? No.
Yeah, so how do you deal with MYP coordinators suggesting that your units are too content heavy? Mm-hmm. I think that was kind of the...
Okay. But I suppose I would answer that question with a question as to why do they think they're too content heavy? Because if you have your written curriculum set out and you're documenting that your students need to have covered this content to be able to enter the DP at a sufficient content level, then I would imagine that you could argue then that content has to be in your unit. Perhaps I'm misinterpreting the question.
Okay, yeah, please let us know if there's a follow-up to that question. And then another question is, I'm fascinated about students' conceptual understanding in maths. How do we give students opportunities to show their conceptual understanding? You mentioned open-ended questions and problem solving. Some problem solving questions are in fact still procedural skills based. Mm-hmm. What are the exercise questions like in the Pearson textbooks?
Yeah, so again, I keep putting it on to Ibrahim, but in his webinar, he's going to be discussing all that in great detail. The explore tasks and the investigation tasks, with the explore tasks, you haven't shown the students any procedures. You haven't said, oh, if you have this, you do this, you do this, you do this. So you're allowing them to explore their own conceptual understanding with the explore tasks. If you're talking about summative assessments, then you have to write them in a particular way. So you might have some knowledge and understanding questions at the beginning that are procedural, because we have to know, do the students have the procedural skills as well? So I suppose it comes in the way you craft your questions, and you have to. But we found that the best way to do that is just collaboratively. So we work as a team and we come up with questions together, and that helps. So if you're looking at a procedural approach, well, in your mind, you're thinking, well, how can I find out if the student can do this? And if you're writing a conceptual question, you have to think, well, how can I ask this so the students can demonstrate what they understand? So it's all in the nature of how you ask the question. And to answer your question, yes, the Pearson series, well, I certainly know the chapters that I was writing, I've written questions in there that are going for a conceptual understanding. They can't just answer them with a set procedure. So there is practice in the books, in the practice tasks. And they will also have practice with the inquiry tasks and the explore tasks.
Okay, we've got a kind of follow-up question on the first two. I think it's a follow-up on the first two. So what do you say to staff who say that there isn't sufficient time for conceptual learning due to the quantity of content that needs to be covered?
Yeah, I take your point. I take your point. And we discussed this yesterday in the unit planning. What we have found is that if we do a conceptual approach, yes, we get through less content, but the conceptual approach, it allows you to go deeper, and you teach not just procedural, but you teach process skills, so reasoning skills, problem solving skills. So you're teaching them what they need to access the content. So you're teaching them those skills to access a smaller amount of content, but when they then get into the DP, you might be introducing content for the first time, but you've worked on their own approaches to learning as well. So you've worked on those, so they access the content a little bit quicker. So what we found is a conceptual approach in the classroom. Yes, we get through the content slower, but we still get through the content at the end. So instead of kind of traveling at this kind of speed, we kind of go like that. So we get more content covered. It's much more efficient getting the content covered at the end.
Thank you. So a question about kind of planning. So when maths teachers are encouraged to plan an investigation for their class, they feel like it's a lot of work. What suggestions do you have to make it less time consuming?
Yeah, it is. Well, what I would suggest is collaboration. So we collaborate within school, we collaborate with other schools, and we share, and that just helps. Even if a school will say, oh look, we tried this for our unit on quadratics. Perhaps it doesn't quite fit your unit, but it gives you something to start with. So we find that really quite useful. We really do. If we're writing it ourselves, and if you're asking me, well, where do I start when I want to write an inquiry task or an inquiry assessment? We start with the objectives. So if you look at the assessment objectives, your students are having to demonstrate particular things. So we'll have that in mind as we're writing our summative assessment. So for example, if I'm writing a criterion B, I'll get an idea for a pattern, and then I'll give a simple pattern at the beginning, and then I'll make it slightly more complex, and then students will have to continue the pattern, then they'll have to generalize the pattern, verify the pattern. So I tend to use those objectives as my guide for writing that assessment. I think we all almost need a whole webinar on how to write these assessments, really. It's difficult to do in a couple of minutes.
Thanks, Paula. That's all the questions for now. I'll just leave it another minute or so. But in the meantime, thank you everybody for joining this session today. I hope you found it useful. Thank you for your questions and your interactions. And thanks to Paula for presenting.
Thank you for listening.
Lots of people saying thank you. Very useful.
And there's a feedback form on the Padlet, if you wouldn't mind providing some feedback if you have a moment. I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.